Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Holiday Family Kitchen. Just sitting out here in a different spot today. It's Thursday morning, in case you're losing track of what day of the week we're dealing with. Reminder about a couple of things. You have an assignment due tomorrow. That's Friday. Some people have already turned that in, and some people have already gotten it back. And I'm trying to kind of get them graded as they come in. So hopefully you're seeing that take place. I also heard from some people saying that they couldn't see the actual questions. If that's the case, I put them on Remind last night, and if you still can't see them there, then give me a shout and we will make sure that you get a hold of the assignment in some way. All right. Otherwise, I am sitting here. I have a book I've been having a look at just to refresh. So if you see me turn to the side here, it's because there's probably some sweet nugget of information I want to impart upon you. I have the laptop sitting here with a couple of images I want to show you as we go through the moment. And then also I have my study guide right here. Today, in our study guide, we're going to pick up on the bottom of page 3. That's right. There-ish. That's where I believe we left off. And I'm not sure if we'll get all the way to the end. Perhaps we will. But in the mean of today, we will also be making our way to the back of the study guide to this page here, which is page 6, where it says, Peace, Land, and Bread for the Russian People. So if you have your study guide with you, that's going to be helpful. I have a copy of the slides sitting here waiting for me so that I can follow along with that. So if you have that as well through Google Classroom, not a bad idea too, okay? And we ready to go? Let us go. Okay, so we are about halfway through the third page, and we left off talking about the problems that World War I created for the Russians. And then the next thing on our study guide is to talk about the complete wackadoodle that is Rasputin. Okay, now, I'm going to adjust this slightly. There you go. I think that's better. Okay, if you have ever played that Dance Dance game, you know, the one where you kind of hold the Wii remote and you do the dance and whatnot, there's a Rasputin song in there, and that's what I've linked at the bottom there. It's not some hugely informative video of Rasputin. It's the one where it goes, rah, rah, Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen. He was a cat who really was gone. That one. So if you're looking for a trip down memory lane, or if you've never heard it, then certainly get on Google Classroom and click on the link. It's a sweet image. Rasputin is an odd duck, and history throws us these kinds of odd ducks once in a while. His background is that he's a Cossack. He's a somewhat educated fellow, but what he really gets into the mindset of the Romanovs for is the fact that he can heal young Alexei. They see him as being the most powerful force in the Russian society because as a faith healer, that's what he calls himself, he can stop the little boy from bleeding out. And Rasputin takes advantage of this. He tells the Romanovs, if I die, you guys are going to die. The dynasty's going to die. The kid's going to die. And Rasputin becomes this incredibly important person among the royal couple. And what's bizarre is that it's incredibly resented by the Russians. Now, you might think, well, they would want the crown prince to live. They hate the idea that this nobody has shuffled himself into the lineup. He becomes like a chief of staff of a president. You can't get to the Tsar or the Tsarina without going through Rasputin. And Rasputin has this way of just completely limiting anyone else's influence upon the royal couple. Now, there's also this shady background about orgies and weird mystical practices, and if you want to go research Rasputin, I'm sure you can find some fun stuff like that. But he is just a very unusual fellow as far as things go. Now, when the Tsar goes off to the front, like we said the other day, once he gets out there, things don't go well at the front, and they're also not going well back here in the capital city. A little bit of a word on things. This is the city of St. Petersburg. That's what St. Petersburg has always been called. Peter the Great created it a long time ago in our earlier study. Now, during World War I, the Russians changed the name, and that's because they believe that the sound of the name St. Petersburg is too German. So they create a city that they name Petrograd. So in a while here, we're going to be talking about Petrograd. Petrograd is St. Petersburg. It's just a less Germanic, more Russian sounding way of saying the name. So Petrograd equals St. Petersburg. Okay? Now, later on, After we have the death of Lenin, we're going to call it Leningrad. And then once we're done with the Soviet Union and its ideas, it will go back to being St. Petersburg. And if you visited it today, it would be St. Petersburg, but I digress. Okay. So what events led to the formation of the provisional government here? Okay, so we're on to this next slide here, the one that doesn't have the picture of Rasputin. Unfortunately, things are going to fall apart inside the country, and this is oftentimes how things go for us. You have a war going on, you have a foreign policy in essence, but it's the domestic one that falls apart. And really, it's an issue of bread. And unlike the other countries we've talked about, places like France and Britain and even the United States, where rationing and the handing out of, say, like little stamps was part of the routine of life, in Russia it didn't happen. The Tsarist government didn't have the organization, and it didn't have the agility, if you like, the flexibility to pass out the stamps, figure out how much food they had, and ration it out accordingly. And so you had massive amounts of shortages of bread, big bread lines as a result of that, and frustrated people. Workers are going to go on strike. Now, the Tsar's advisors' easiest answer to this is bring out the troops. That's what they've been relying on for really about a decade. He's supposed to have that Duma working for him. He's kicked it to the curb. Back in 1915, he stopped listening to them entirely, and now he's basically going to rely upon thug force. I'm going to get the army out. Just going to put some muscle in and push people around. Now, unfortunately, for him, the army eventually is going to have a very serious thought of, these are our people. Right? I have far more in common with the woman standing in the bread line or the poor starving child in the bread line than I do with the Tsar. I don't understand why I'm being asked to shoot innocent Russians who simply are standing up saying, we're hungry. Do something about it. And so when the situation reaches a critical mass in March of 1917, the Tsar is faced with a very tough decision. He sends out the troops. The troops will not fire upon the people. They mutiny, that's the best word for it, against him, and realizing that he has lost control of the situation, the Tsar abdicates. That means to steps down from the throne, and Russia now enters this vacuum moment of, what are we now? You know, what is this thing that we are now? Because we understand, and we've talked about this before, right? Talked about it with French Revolution. Destruction, kind of an easy thing. Start swinging a hammer, start swinging a sledgehammer, break some stuff down. It's easy to do. Construction, very difficult to do. So in the French Revolution, we talked about a moderate phase and a radical phase of the revolution. Same process here with the Russian Revolution. We're about to have the moderate phase, what we'll call the provisional government, and then in a little while we'll have the radical phase, what's called the Bolshevik or the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics portion, the part that people probably more famously know. But for a brief period of time in the middle here, we're going to have this middle-class style moderate revolution that's the initial stage of the Russian Revolution. Okay, looking at your study guide, we're going to go from this page, page 3, we're going to flip. See how we did that? Flip right there. And then there's going to be a slide here that says who controls Russia in 1917. That's the slide we're looking at. Now, there's a chart. It says at the top of it, Provisional Government, Petrograd Soviet. We'll talk about what those words mean in a moment. But we're going to start with Provisional Government. Okay? And we're going to go down this chart. So first box there, who belongs to it or leads it. Okay? The provisional government is exactly that word. Now, provisional might not be something of a word that you use a lot, but in the world of golf, I'm going to throw a golf reference, provisional is a word you use. How do you use it? Well, generally in golf, you'll hit a ball off the tee, and if you don't know where that ball has gone and you think it might be lost, you hit a second one. And what you say is, this is my provisional golf ball. Okay? Provisional meaning temporary. It's not supposed to be forever. So this government that's being created here in Russia is a provisional or temporary government led by a socialist leaning but kind of middle classy socialist named Alexander Kerensky. Kerensky and his chums want a Russia that's going to move in the Britain-France sort of lineup towards becoming a middle class society, like 19th century moderate liberalism. right? We understand what that model is. We're going to give the right kind of men the right to vote. We're going to give freedoms of speech in the press and all of that. We're going to build an industrial society. It's going to look like London 1815 or 1850 or somewhere in there. It's going to be a society where we can be like, this is not, it's not radical. It's not a democracy, right? We're not going to let the Russian serfs vote. But what we are going to do is give people some simple liberties and rights, okay? Now, their ideas. This is important for us, so make sure we're following along. Number one, and mistake number one for the record, they stayed in the war. What? So, the thing that caused most of Russia's problems in 1917 was the burden of fighting the war that's going on the Western Front. They're getting hammered. And instead of perhaps withdrawing from the war and thinking, let's take care of business at home, the members of the provisional government think, nah, let's continue to fight in the war. And as a result of it, really all the problems become yours, right? Think about that. That happens in life sometimes. You go, hey, here's a problem. It's not something I created. It's a problem that someone else created and I inherited. And now the provisional government has inherited all of the problems of the Tsarist regime. When we used to say, Nicholas II, where's the bread, you fool? Now we're looking at Kerensky and his buddies going, where's the bread? You aren't giving us bread either. Why should we be happy with you? So almost immediately, strike one, okay? Strike number two. And I know it says liberal reform here, but I'm going to go with that third bullet, called for elections. Kerensky decides what we're going to do is have a provisional election. We will let the people of Russia vote in an election that allows them to choose the future. And Kerensky's hoping they pick his party for the future. But here's what we need to do. It's March 1917. He schedules these elections for the end of 1917. And in the meantime, we need to go out and educate the people. Now, keep in mind, the Russian farmer is a person who has never in his life or her life come across the notion of democratic principles, liberty, freedom. They don't know. Okay? And suddenly you're going to go to them and say, okay, the Tsarist regime, the Romanovs, it's finished. Okay? But for now, I need you to think about voting and freedom and which party you want. It is clunky as heck. And it's a long way down the road. The provisional government is going to have to sit here in its own stink for the next 9 months, waiting and waiting and waiting for the right moment to kind of move along to this new government. In the meantime, it's just a provisional. It's a placekeeper, okay? So the problems that existed before, the war and the hunger, are still there. The provisional government's plan of staying in the war is a huge mistake. I also mentioned that they make some liberal reforms here, but let's be honest, that doesn't feed me. If you say to me, hey, Holiday, we're going to have the freedom of speech, well, that's all grand. I like to speak myself, but I like to eat too. I really do like to eat. Okay, so unfortunately, there's no chance that this is really going to have a great effect. Okay, now, what you have to understand is the left side of this chart, the provisional government, is what power technically exists in Petrograd. That is the real government of the Russian people. But the more popular thing, the thing that's kind of brewing a steam over here on the right-hand side, is a group called the Petrograd Soviet. Okay, now this could be confusing, so we need to make sure we wander our way through here very carefully, but there is a second force or source, if we like, of government that is making its way into Russian society, and it is representing in its eyes the will of the people more clearly, okay? So let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at the person who's in charge here. We're on the top of this study guide box, Petrograd Soviet, okay? Petrograd, the city, that's what that is. Soviet, important word for us. A Soviet is a group of workers, soldiers, and farmers. That's what that word means. It's a Russian word that is intended to mean kind of a community, a commune of the people. And that's the essential three-way of the Russian folk, okay? Have a look at the map, not the map, you fool, the flag of the Soviet Union that we end up having here in the long run. I'm going to switch that. There it is, right? There's the flag of the Soviet Union. 3 symbols in it. The star representing the Red Army, the soldiers. The hammer representing the worker among the Russian people. And the sickle representing the farmer. So those are the 3 groups that make up a Soviet, okay? In the vernacular, the language of things, The Soviet is who's going to lead us. So the Petrograd is a committee of soldiers, workers, and farmers in this particular city. There are Soviets in other cities throughout Russia as well. The Petrograd Soviet happens to be the largest, the strongest, and the one that's the best known. Okay, good with that? Hopefully good with that. Into the situation then comes a unique personality. Okay, let's get a picture. Here he is, Vladimir Lenin. I'm going to switch you again, ladies and gentlemen. There's Lenin. If you think about my classroom, I've got like a little tall statue bust up on that bookshelf that's in my room of Lenin, okay, that someone gave to me as a gift that I kind of keep because it's kind of kitschy and fun. Okay, a little background on Lenin. Lenin is a revolutionary, and he is raised in this middle-class family background. His brother's into radical politics. In fact, his brother is executed for an attempt on the life of Tsar Alexander III. Whoa, hot stuff. And later in life, Lenin himself is exiled to Siberia for his radical ideas. Now, I say exiled to Siberia, and if you know anything about history, you're supposed to go, whoa, that ain't good. And it isn't 99% of the time, but for some reason, the Tsarist regime had kind of a soft spot for intellectual revolutionary types like Lenin, and so he spent his entire time in Siberia sitting in a cabin, reading, writing, hanging out with other revolutionaries. It was almost like revolutionary summer camp in Siberia, and then after he comes back, he's exiled. He's kicked out of the country because if I'm the Tsar, I don't want you around. And so he lives most of World War I in Switzerland. Okay. And then there is this awesome moment of total war where the Germans, who are trying to knock the Russians out of the war, have this think moment. They go, I wonder what we could do in order to destabilize Russia even more. What if we took one of their biggest pains in the neck and we just sort of picked him up from where he is in Switzerland and we carried him across the front lines of the war, and then we just sprinkled that sucker, Salt Bay, right? You sprinkle like that. And we sprinkled him into the Russian society, and we're like, here you go. So the Germans contact Vladimir Lenin, who at this point is a well-known revolutionary voice, but he's not in Russia. He's hanging out in Switzerland, and they say to him, hey, Vladimir, would you like a journey into the heart of Russia where things are so fluid? And Vladimir, for his notion, has been dreaming of this day of creating a socialist world in Russia, his native country. And of course, he's going to say, hot dog, I would. And they put him on a train. They make a big deal out of this. They seal the train, like seal it, and they won't open it until it gets to Russia. So it travels through Germany, and it goes all the way to Russia. Why sealed? Because they don't want any of the socialist whiff to get out of the train. Crazy, right? As though it might come whiffing out. It might go all the way to Vermont and influence the Bernie Sanders future. Just kidding. Just a Bernie joke. Just having some fun, people, okay? And so the train gets to Petrograd, and they open up the train, and they drop into the midst of this already kind of edgy situation, Vladimir Lenin. And Lenin gets into there and is already, from the moment go, kind of fired up and ready to fly. Back to my PowerPoint for a moment. Hold on. Okay. Lenin believes in socialism. He believes in this idea of creating a classless society where we share the wealth. Okay, now in the parentheses, I say here, led by Bolsheviks. Okay, little definition. Lenin's group, the Bolsheviks, this particular socialist enterprise, has a slight difference from what Marx had said. And here's how. Marx said that revolution occurs when the working classes become so big in number that they realize their numerical advantage and they attack the middle class bourgeois and overwhelm them, take their resources, and create the classless society. Okay, that's Marx. Lenin's idea is slightly different. Lenin's going to say to you, I don't know about Russia as far as being revolutionary minded, right? The working classes here don't have enough class consciousness. That's what Marx would have called it. Realization of their place in the scheme, like understanding where you are in the grand cosmos. Lenin's idea is that the average person's never going to develop that. So we have to develop it for them. We, that is to say the Bolsheviks, have to build a sense of strength in the place. So the Bolsheviks, in Lenin's mind, are a revolutionary core of hard crack, ready to roll, almost ninja socialist revolutionaries who will start the revolution on behalf of the group of people in Russia. And then, in the long run, we'll educate them, we'll bring them up to speed, there's a phrase, and we will use that as a way of creating a revolution for the people. So if you said to Lenin, Lenin, do you represent the will of the Russian people? Lenin would say, calm down, calm down. The average Russian peasant doesn't know up from down. You can't talk to them about Marxist socialism and the dictatorship of the proletariat. You're going to confuse them. Here's what I'm going to tell them. I'm going to tell them a really simple message. And here it is. Let's go, if we would, ladies and gentlemen, to the back of the packet. Okay, right here. This is the document I'm looking for. I know it's backwards in yours, but you can find it there, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Lenin has a 3-word pledge. Here it is. Peace, land, bread. That's how you appeal to a Russian person. Peace, land, bread. You just say those 3 things in 1917, headed towards 1918 here, and you're going to catch some favorable opinion, okay? Lenin writes, or speaks, I suppose, here. Okay. 3rd paragraph down. The Soviet government will propose an immediate democratic peace to all the nations and an immediate armistice on all fronts. In other words, we're going to end this war. Right off the bat, if you're a Russian, you're like, I like your plan, Lenin. That's a good idea. I am going to end this war. Why? Because it's the source of the problems. It's the reason we don't have food. It's the reason we have problems within our Russian state. It is everything wrong. And, importantly, Kerensky and all of his rat, middle-class, bourgeois, kind of sellout socialists, they like the war. We oppose the war. See what Lenin's doing here? He's bringing the people a message that they can relate to. Stop believing in that provisional government and its small group of people it appeals to. Believe in us, all right? Peace, number 2. He goes on. The Congress decrees all power in the localities shall pass to the Soviets, that working committee, right, of workers, soldiers, and peasants' deputies, which must guarantee genuine revolutionary order. Yeah, what Lenin is laying out here is that they will grant to the Soviets the power to control the entire state. Peace, I will give you land, and I will feed you bread. And that's the pitch. 3 words, quite straightforward. Now, Lenin can sit around and wait for an election if he likes, I suppose. He could sit here and say, hey, there's an election coming up at the end of December. Our plan is peace, land, and bread. We'd appreciate your vote. Here's a sticker. But on the other hand, that really doesn't ring true with his socialist mentality. I already talked about the fact that he discredits the general vibe of the people as having been too backwards, too slow. And so here's what I do if I'm Lenin. I wait for the right moment. I wait for the moment where I can seize power and I can put the power in the hand of the Bolshevik Party, or, as we're calling it here, the Petrograd Soviet. I'm not going to really wait for an election, because let's be fair, an election is kind of a bourgeois thing. Not a lot of people sit around going, oh my God, the election was so bougie. They don't sit around saying that, but it is. It isn't something that relates to the people. Dirt under your fingernails. We're eating beets for dinner because we're Russians. Drinking some homemade vodka because we're Russians. All of those things. That really doesn't ring with us. So if I'm Lenin, I'm not going to wait for this election. I'm going to wait for the right moment, and I'm going to take power. And when someone says, hey, Lenin, you didn't win the election, which, by the way, they won't win the election. They won't even come close. Lenin's going to be like, elections. Elections are for squares. It's for bourgeois, middle-classy people. We, on the other hand, believe in the power to the people delivered to you by your friendly Bolshevik party. Okay, that's what we're going to do. I mentioned here democracy in the army. The Petrograd Soviet, who has no power to do this, by the way, puts forward an order to the army, which in essence says this: if you guys don't want to fight anymore, don't fight anymore. Just give up. You're finished. You can have a choice among the group who's in charge and whether or not you go to war tomorrow morning. And a lot of the people in the army say, we're out of here. If you look back, I know it's a long way to look back, but if you look back at the charts we had that showed you the casualties of World War I, you look at Russia, World War I casualties missing 2.5 million. You know why? Because the army, in the flurry, the fog of all of this, is like, hell no, I'm not staying out here. The country's getting carved up into small bite-sized pieces. I got to go home and get me some land. And they said all that in Russian, I imagine. But then they just picked up and they tailed home. So the army disintegrates. And again, the Petrograd Soviet doesn't have the power to say that, but they say it. And so all of a sudden, if you're the provisional government, you're waiting on this election, you're stuck in the war, all the popular chatter is over here in this new Petrograd Soviet, and you're like, we're just not doing too well here. And you're not. Okay, if you look at the next square, I'm going to flip back through my packet here. Hope you're doing well, by the way. What factors led to the collapse of the provisional government and the seizure of power by the Bolsheviks? I list a couple of things here. Essentially, that the workers went on strike, the soldiers didn't want to fight anymore, no one believed in the provisional government, and Lenin understood it. And he ran in and he snatched up power. There's a warship out in the harbor in St. Petersburg. He had the soldiers, or I should say the sailors, on his side, and the sailors turned the guns of the ship towards the imperial palace where Kerensky and his boys were, and they were like, you have a choice. You walk out the door, or we can blow the place up. And they took over. And so the Russian Revolution had that moderate phase, which is the phase of the provisional government, and it has a radical phase, which is going to be the one conducted now by the Bolshevik Party. Okay, now, if you're the Bolshevik Party, you have the same problem that the provisional government had. You have inherited their problems. So, all that talk, all that chatter about peace, land, and bread, it better be real, because if it's not real, you're going to be gone too. Okay, so you had better come up with something. I have as the next slide here a picture of the Soviet Union, just to give you a sense of how large it is, and to talk naming for a moment. The USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So there are together here across, and you can look at the size of it, the USSR is a whopper, okay? Across Europe and Asia, a group of countries. Now, Russia's the largest. If you look at it, the bulk of it is Russia. But then also, Western countries we would be familiar with, like, you know, looking at this, you can see the Ukraine there and Belarus, and then you've got a lot of the stands. If you look at a map today, Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. Oh, very nice, okay, as they expand out. But Russia's the biggest, right? The part on your map where USSR is written out, that's where Russia is. It's the biggest one across the way. Okay. Now, the Soviets at work. Okay, the Soviets at work here is my attempt to hit this last little box I have here, Bolshevik policy on. And as I said, peace, land, bread, that's what you've got to do. So, right off the bat, land. We're going to pass out the land to the peasants. Done. There you go, guys. That's yours. Work it, make money off of it, somehow make yourselves more profitable. How are you going to do that? More on that at the end of this on our next question. We'll help you out with that, we promise. Factories, nationalized. In other words, they're taken over. They're no longer private industries. Say, for instance, Holiday Steel was the biggest company in all of Russia. Not anymore. You are no longer Holiday Steel. That factory is the possession of the people of the Soviet Union. Keep in mind, this is now a socialist state. And in a socialist state, we share the resources. The government will own it and control it for the good of the people. Ooh, more on how that's dicey, okay? And thirdly, we are getting you out of the war. Through the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, that's the two guys who sign it, Brest and Litovsk, great names. They end Russia's presence in World War I. Now, they have to give up a huge chunk of Western Russia in order to do this. And in doing it, Lenin is being a little bit future thinking. right? Because remember what we're playing here is socialist revolution. Socialist revolution is not resolved in a year or in 2 years or in 5 years. This is a forever game. So what Lenin's saying is, hey, I tell you what, if getting out of the war requires this much land, you can have it. You know why he can do that? Because one day we're going to own the world, baby. We're going to own the whole thing. It's all going to be one big workers, soldiers, farmers paradise. So if that small piece of land is enough for you to get out by my face, take it. And later, we will take it back, as well as every other strip of land on the planet. That's Lenin's idea. We're going to have this massive socialist world. The Soviet Union is part A. There is so much more to do. Lenin is planning not a revolution in a country, but a revolution of the world, keep in mind, right? That is Marx's dream. Not a revolution of one place, but a revolution of many places. All the places. Oh, big plans, okay? Now, lastly, I didn't mention this, and it's not on the slide, but it's worth mentioning. They killed the Romanovs. Yeah, thanks for bearing the lead, Holiday. As long as the Romanovs are alive, much like when we talked about the Bourbons back in the day of the French Revolution, as long as the Romanovs are alive, they're an option. So the Romanovs are killed. And that happens in early 1918, and it's done in a way where history allows us a little bit of a whoo, right? Because when they go through there, there's always this idea that Anastasia escapes, that one of the Romanov children, perhaps even two of them, are alive and they're out there. And then through the 20th century, there's a whole bunch of people popping up like, I am Anastasia. I am the heir to the Russian throne. Right? And then especially when things go bad for the Soviet Union, there are people who are the children of, who are going to be like, or claim to be the children of, are going to be like, I am the child of Anastasia. You should put me back on the throne. Let's go back to a monarchy, back in the good old days. Now, unfortunately for all of those people, further excavations find the bodies that are the bodies of those other Romanov children. So they shot them all. They killed them all. That's what revolutionaries do, folks. They tear the place up a wee bit. And the Romanovs, unfortunately, are all dead. Lenin here is going to make a little bit of a concession to understanding how the world is a little bit realistic. Okay, Lenin, I have a small spot of faith in my heart for Lenin. He's a socialist, so I think he's a little bit on the kooky side. But I do have a little bit of a liking for him because he's honest about his revolutionary values. He hits you with them. He's not skulky, he's not Stalin. We'll talk about Stalin when we get there, and Stalin's a bad dude. But Lenin he just has these ideas, and they're different from yours, and he is honest with them, and I kind of like him a little bit. But here's what Lenin's going to say. I know that we cannot go whole-scale socialism today. That if we go from a Russia that was already behind, that then hit World War I, that then went through the struggle of the moderate phase and this now radical phase of this revolution, if I just go full-scale socialism right now, it'll flop. I have to go somewhat capitalism. So Lenin introduced what's called the NEP, the New Economic Policy. And the plan here is to allow you a little bit of capitalism while we learn about socialism. So here's how it works. Socialism on the big front, major national industries, railroad, steel, oil, electricity, those all belong to the state, to the Soviet government, and in essence then to all of the people. But on a small scale level, farms, small industry, little craft work if you like, artisanal things, you can make those yourself, you can sell them yourself, you can make a profit. So, as I said, on a large scale level, socialism. On a small scale, down home level, capitalism. Now, eventually that's going to morph out. But what you have here then is a system constructed, and I'm just checking I have the right slide here, yeah. You have a system constructed that allows people a little bit of capitalism while we transition them off of old style capitalism and onto socialism. Holiday, does that work, this new system? Not really. By the time of Lenin's death, okay, unfortunately for Lenin, they haven't done much. What you end up with is a Russia that's still producing the same level of industrial output as it was prior to World War I. The Russians have problems. They really do. And unfortunately, there's nothing that's going to solve that until we come up with Stalin and his purges and his radical measures, which I don't know if that's really a solution so much as I'll make it work, okay? The last slide I have here is a picture of Lenin. Lenin passes away, unfortunately, and when he dies, his body is entombed. And I have it here, and it is still that. This is one of those fascinating stories. You're looking for a cool Google search today, go Lenin's body and then whatever you want, and you'll find it. There's a team of scientists whose job it is to keep that body looking as it did nearly 100 years ago when Lenin died. And the same group is in charge of preserving the bodies of Ho Chi Minh, who's the socialist radical leader in Vietnam, as well as the two predecessors of our boy Kim Jong-un out in North Korea, both his father and his grandfather. I'm not sure what it is with socialists and preserving the bodies, but okay. But you can go and see Lenin sitting in state. Now, his body has been chemicaled and parts of it have been changed. And of course, all the interior organs and whatnot are gone. But these scientists, their job is to keep Lenin looking as Lenin-like as possible. It's fascinating stuff, ladies and gentlemen. I'm telling you, it's crazy. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the unit here, okay? And you're probably wondering what's next, Holiday, okay? This video, as I said, you're going to watch today, and then I'm not going to hit you with anything tomorrow, Friday. There's the assignment that's due on Friday, but then, and Friday's date, just to check here, March 20th, by the way. Then on Monday, which will be March, 23rd, okay? On March 23rd, I want to come back. I want to talk some multiple choice questions here, and then I'm going to give you an assignment that is probably an essay over the unit that you'll work on during the week next week. Okay, so that's what I have in mind here. I do not expect you to do any work over the weekend. It's still your weekend. Okay, we may be on Corona quarantine, but it's still your weekend. You have a right to a weekend. I hope you're well. If there's anything I can do, you know how to get in touch with me. But otherwise, have a great day. Take care of yourself.